With this slideshow, we returned to the archaeological site of Akrotiri on the island of Thera, and the important frescoes that it preserved due to the eruption that occurred. Now, one thing I want to point out here is that this is a crescent-shaped island with this caldera in the center. That was not always thought to be the case prior to the Minoan eruption, which is around 1600, 1625. That's a big matter of debate, and I'm not going to stick my foot into it. But you can see on the right some of the spectacular shots of the island and the site. If you've ever seen travel posters, tourist posters for Greece, they're frequently showing this island because it's so spectacular. We can see the ash on the left and how the winds were blowing from the northwest, and the ash went down and covered parts of Crete and other islands. And this is very important because we can use that as a terminus antequem or postquem in the archaeological record. That is to say, anything above the Theran ash postdates it, anything below predates it. Also, it was thought until the 80s or so that the island was a cone-shaped island, and the center got blown out with the Minoan eruption around 1600 BC. We now know that that's not the case, and the caldera was not much different in the Bronze Age than it is now. So, C and B are what it looked like in the Bronze Age. The caldera was filled into something like 20 or 30,000 years ago. We don't have to worry about that. But the Bronze Age eruption shot out the northwest sort of passage there and also expanded the southwest entrance. The island, once again, is not cone-shaped like this, or it wasn't at the time of the Bronze Age. So don't imagine it like that. But imagine it like this, but connected on the top left. So that's how it's been for quite a long. And this is important for understanding the Flotilla fresco, and some research I've done on it. Here are just some other wonderful shots. Those are the Paleo and Nea Khameni, these little islands in the center of the caldera that have been made since the Roman times. Pliny records one of the eruptions here. I think the last one was in the 1940s, and so this is continually growing. And then you can see it is surrounded by these cliffs that fade off to spectacular beaches on the outside of the island. And here, just to give you an idea of the size, that boat there on the bottom right, that's a massive boat. That boat is probably the length of probably at least half, if not 2/3 of the campus. It holds tons of people. Tourist boats come in and out of this island because it's so popular. But that boat gives you an idea of just how big this caldera is and how steep these cliffs are. So once again, this is how the island looked on the left, and the archaeological site is on the southern portion of the island, facing out. And here is a plan of the Santorini, and those red areas are where frescoes have been found. And I'm going to concentrate on one fresco from the West House there on the upper left, where there's one second-story room that had frescoes. Notice that not all the rooms have them, and so what's going on there is uncertain. But what's interesting about this is that it's not a palace. It's just this is a town or a village, and it gives us a good idea about daily Minoan or Bronze Age, late Bronze Age life. And here's a shot of the West House as you can see it now. They have these sort of crazy low windows, but you would go in there on the left in that doorway, and you would go up steps. As shown in the bottom right here, get to the second floor, go through 1/6 room 16, then room 17, and then you can enter room 15, and that is the important room for us. Once again, here's a plan of the West House. Now there are a series of frescoes that are around the top of this room. They are miniature frescoes, and they're not the life-size ones that we looked at before, or almost life-size. And I'll show you some more of those. These are miniatures. They went around the top of the wall in this room. So here we can see in room 5 the how the frescoes went along the top of it, and then below them were either windows, or the fishermen were painted, or this woman holding an incense burner. I'll come back to all that. So it was all around the room, and they were miniatures. And the one on A is not really preserved for us. B, we talked about this meeting on the hill and the battleship, the military battle. We're going to focus on the one and then the Nilotic fresco after that, and then we're going to focus on the bottom one right now with the Flotilla fresco, because as I said, this is a really special fresco. Now we'll look at it in details, and it's on the south wall of this room, and we'll see that there are these massive boats departing from the left-hand side of the fresco and going to the right. And we can see dolphins jumping around, and as I'll show you later, there's even dolphins in the lower down within the caldera. And we can see that there's rowers there, or actually paddlers. If you look real close, the men are leaning out of the boat and paddling. And then they don't have their sails furled for some reason. And we think it's perhaps because it's a ceremony, but I'll come back to that. Notice on the top boat, that little cabin on the left, that's the Icria. I believe I showed some before. And that's where special people would sit. And just to point out how depth is handled here, below is in front, above is behind. So we can imagine that boat on the top is outside the caldera, the one on the bottom is inside the caldera, and notice the horizontal lines on the caldera. Now, once again, just to get a layout of how things worked at the top of this room, or in top of these walls. And here are some nice reconstructions of it. And once again, we'll be focusing on the one on the lower right. Here's another drawing, a reconstruction of them on the other walls where it's not well preserved. And this gives you an idea of the size. And so the fishermen that we mentioned before, come back to later, were about the size of, almost human size, but the ones on the top are miniatures. So we see now keep in mind here that this is one long fresco. So the right, it sort of continues onto the lower left. Top right continues onto the lower left. The front of that boat on the upper right continues on the lower left. It's just been cut in half in order to show you the whole thing. And so we see these big boats coming from the left and going to the right. And they are festooned with decorations, and I'll come back to that later. And even though they have sails, they are being paddled with one exception, and that is in the bottom slide on the lower left. That one has its sails up. Why that is unclear. But we can also, once again, see these dolphins jumping around, as we already saw at Knossos. Now, back to this departure town on the left. That's what they call this town on the lower left. We see rocks depicted in a way that's unusual for frescoes, and that is to say, they're horizontal bands. Usually, we see vertical registers for stones, and then somehow this village is plastered underneath it. I do want to point out on the upper left we see deer and even a lion at one point running. Lions were not indigenous to the island, were certainly brought to the island. But then deer running around is quite impressive. You got to keep in mind that these are not big islands at all. They're like, maybe a little bit bigger than the downtown area of Providence. So, it's constrained. But look at how the rocks are depicted horizontally. And if you go to the island and you take a boat inside of the caldera, you can see these stratigraphic layers of the geology. And then there's that little house that is implanted against the side of it. So those, there's, I believe it's a phyllite quartzite foundation and then various eruptions on top. And on the very, very top, that very white one, is the Minoan eruption that covered the archaeological site of Santorini. Interestingly enough, sites were found on the island when the Suez Canal was being built because they used that tephra or pumice from the very top. Apparently, once it's put underwater, it becomes waterproof. So the whole of the Suez Canal is lined with that tephra. And once again, just to see some of these boats, and here they're coming to the arrival town. And you can see on the right-hand side, the rocks sticking out. This is sort of the traditional way of showing rocks in Minoan and Mycenaean art. These sort of vertical registers, and they have different colors. And once again, depth is shown from a boat on top and the boat on the bottom, one's outside the caldera, one's inside. And important people are seated in the cabins in the back. Here's just another shot of that. It also gives you an idea of, how much of the fresco is preserved and how much is reconstructed. But what seems to be going on here, with all the festooning and the paddling, seems to be some sort of a ceremony. Keep in mind here, if you have sails, there's no reason to paddle if you're going long distance. But perhaps they're just inside the caldera itself. This was a big, when it was first found, the Maronatos, the excavator, called it a depiction of the Libyan expedition because of the frescoes found on the bottom, on the other side of the room, that he thought showed people of African origin. And that's been a matter of debate of where these boats are coming from or going. But it's now pretty much accepted that they are inside the caldera, and just something special is happening here. And once again, if you had sails, you would not be paddling if you're on a long voyage. Moreover, as you can see, the one on the upper left, it is festooned. So, why is it decorated? Well, one important idea is that it's some sort of naval ceremony. I don't know if any of you have ever had the chance to go down to Newport when they have the tall ships come in. Really impressive, and it shows the route they take on the upper right. And these are these old type of boats that we no longer use, but they're interesting to look at and watch, and for these festivals. And one of the things that has been argued is that the boats on the Flotilla Fresco are a bit anachronistic, a bit early, and so perhaps earlier than when they were painted. So it's thought that perhaps we have some sort of naval ceremony going on. And as we saw, Thera is has a wonderful harbor. It had walls all around it of the caldera, so that broke all the waves, et cetera, and was just a spectacularly good port. Here we see a reconstruction of one of the boats, and these ones have oars on them, but they're mostly paddled. We can see the Icria on the right is sort of cut off there, but that's where a special person sits. He or she even takes steps up to it. And then these other people in the center. And then a nice roof to keep you out of the sun, and then the furled sail. Now, I can't stress enough the the rocks here, the different colored rocks, um, and some other parts of it. But I'll come back to that in a moment. Um, I just want you to once again pay attention to the fact that there's a boat on the lower, the big boat on the lower left is inside, and notice that little boat with one rower, um, and he seems to be going around the the boats and looking at them, just as we saw in that that Newport naval ceremony. Little boats come out to see the big ones, and indeed we see a bunch of them, and they seem to be harbored here, um, in on the upper right and the upper left. No paddles are out. Well, the one on the upper left does, but the one on the bottom seems to be out at sea. And then there's all these buildings on the right, or the stones, and people stand and they're all looking out to the left. This is the arrival town. As the departure town, they're looking out. They're looking to the right. So everybody is watching this ceremony, what we believe to be a ceremony now, and not a long voyage. And I've argued, one of the things that happened is when Marinatos found these frescoes, he didn't know that the center was blown out already at the Bronze Age, that it wasn't even there for the Minoans, that cone-shaped center. So he always imagined these boats going, to somewhere else. And a lot of people argued that point, that they were going to, Crete or what have you. But it now seems pretty certain that they were placed inside. They're supposed to be shown inside the caldera. And here's a sort of nice way to see it. We see this person standing at the Bronze Age caldera. That island in the middle is just like the ones I showed you earlier, the modern ones, which was later eruptions would come up and create the islands. And what we see here is a view from this Minoan looking out and seeing all these boats go left to right. This is my interpretation of this fresco. It's met with some some disagreement. But the problem is that, if you ever go into academia, one of the things that happens is when you publish something that's different than what everybody else says, you get a strong pushback because they've already published and they don't want to see their ideas squelched. So this, I think, is what's happening with the Flotilla fresco. This is, it's starting even to get into books this way, but there's certainly a generational divide. My older colleagues don't like the idea, the younger ones do. Now, back to the stones. And here's something else that I think proves the interior of the caldera. Once again, we see these people standing on buildings or on the land, and they're all looking to the right. This is the departure town on the left hand side of this fresco. And we see these, red and blue rocks going horizontally. And I think it represents something like this. And this is what you see at the caldera at Santorini when you go there today. The white part is the Minoan ash that was deposited after the fresco was painted. After. But the red and yellow ones were there, and people could see them. And we even have modern villages that look similar to this. This is the village of Ia, spectacular views at sunset. And there's the top, there's the upper village, and then the lower village where the port is and where the boats are docked, etc. And once again, you can see the brilliant colors and the horizontal banding of the stones or of the geology. And I'll keep pointing this out in future lectures that that is unusual way of showing stones traditionally in Minoan and Mycenaean frescoes. And so I have argued that something different is going on here, and that we have a landscape. We have a real place that is being shown. And see, that's something different too than how frescoes have been interpreted in the past. I do want to point out something fun, how this can sort of confirm my argument, is there is this, on the right bottom in the middle there, we see the arrival town. And in this square area, we see, focus on the black and white thing there. We see these rows of triangles. They seem to have walls around them. And so everybody published this as a building. But then they would say they don't know what it is. It doesn't look like any of the other buildings on it. It doesn't even really look too much like a building. So it's been a matter of confusion that I think is fixed if we take my view. And we think of these not as a structure, but as what are called taphonia or taphoni and dikes. Taphoni, I'll show you shortly, real pictures, and dikes as well. But there are basically horizontal hollows in the geology. Once again, here you can see it better with this slide and the red. And the white one on the bottom is just making it clear. That's been added to the fresco, obviously, for this slide, to give you an idea of what's being shown. And then here's a close-up of it. Now, what I'm arguing is that these things, like the wall on the left there, is what's called a dike. And that happens in volcanoes when there's, prior to eruptions or right after the eruption, there'll be a horizontal fissure in the mountain, and volcanic ash, I shouldn't say ash, volcanic lava bursts up through it. And what it tends to do, because of the matrix of the tephra, of the lava, is that when it dries in squares or rectangles. And so, perhaps what was interpreted as a wall is in fact just that. And then, once again, taphoni are these hollows in the geology. So, for example, I took this photograph. This is from the modern port with the rental cars and all that sort of stuff. And you can see the geology there, and you can see sort of rows of hollows, and they're called taphoni by geologists. Now, it isn't precisely like the one in the fresco, because they're not straight triangles, but they get the idea across. And if you know what you're looking at, you go, oh yeah, they're just trying to show these hollows in the rock. And here we see some more. And on the right, there's even some of them in rows. And once again, this is below the Minoan ash, so this was there prior to the Bronze Age eruption, or we think equivalents of it. Obviously, something was blown off the interior wall of the caldera during the Minoan eruption. And then these re-emerge. They're just erosion cavities is what they're called. And then dikes, we can see here in the lower left and on the top picture, once again, where the lava shoots up. And look on the left, that close-up there, and you can see it even sort of breaks into rectangles or dries into rectangles, I guess, once again, due to the matrix of the stone. And so on the bottom right, when we see the rows of taphonia, that wall on the left, I think, is a dike. And so we're not looking at a human-made structure, but we're looking at nature, or their attempt to show nature. And once again, since they're festooned and their sails are not up like there's ones in Newport, it's now thought that, we're having some sort of naval ceremony here. I want to point out, too, that if you ever have a chance to go to Greece and go to Santorini, do so. The geology is just spectacular, It's a beautiful island. It's an absolute tourist trap, I'm sorry to say, but you got to see it. It's just wonderful. And once again, I think the reconstruction of the Flotilla Fresco should be something like on the bottom here. And we're seeing real scenes. That perhaps you came to Santorini because of the ceremony, and so you would show the ceremony on walls and in paintings, or just general sights of the island. Now you always ask, why would anybody paint what's there, what they can see? But what's interesting is when you go to Thera these are just the caldera is painted everywhere. These are modern paintings from little hotels I stayed in, showing the caldera because it's the most spectacular view of the island. And I think we can attribute that same awe to the Minoans or to the people that lived at Thera. This just it's being so impressed by the view that if you're an artist, you couldn't pass it up. You had to paint it. And indeed, when you go there now, people were sitting in the caldera's rim painting it all the time. And just here's some other shots of it or paintings we see in the hotels I stayed in, just reminding us what is there. And so this is a frequent habit. My point is this: is that to have pictures on the walls of things you're seeing right outside. For example, you go to the Grand Canyon, you stay at a hotel. It's as I did when I went to the Grand Canyon. I stayed at a hotel where I could see the canyon from my bedroom window. Nevertheless, there's paintings on the wall of the canyon. That's what you're there to see. And so I think this is a bit of a tourist spot for Minoans. And with this wonderful caldera, they were able to have naval ceremonies. And so I will end it there. We'll talk some more about frescoes, some other frescoes, and we'll keep on coming back to them throughout the Bronze Age. But I think this one on Santorini is basically just showing us a landscape, and that's sort of an important interpretation for people who specialize in the art of this region and time period, because there really aren't any real landscapes. It's usually thought that a lot of these places were imaginary, and there's good reason to believe that with some of the other paintings, that something spiritual or heavenly is going on in the paintings. But I think this is just a wonderful painting for the showing the depiction of the events that take place in the ceremony.